Hello readers! Today we're going to learn about the plot of stories. We like stories with exciting plots. We want the thrills, maybe like we're on a roller coaster. We're going to learn how a plot unfolds in a series of predictable steps that we can mark on a diagram or map. This will help us in two ways. First, it will help us understand the stories we read better. And it will help us as writers because we will use a plot diagram to plan a compelling story. Before we begin, let's get organized. Please open your notebook and follow the directions on this page for the table of contents and to paste the chart into the notebook. You can go ahead and press pause, and when you're ready to resume, you can click the video back on. This is the basic shape of the plot diagram or plot map. Maybe in elementary school you called it a story mountain or a story coaster. It's all the same thing. And the thing you'll notice about it is that this line right here is the line that the conflict in the story follows. In the beginning of the story, there isn't really much of a conflict going on. Then something happens to give the main character a conflict in the story. That conflict escalates and gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until finally there's a turning point and things start heading towards some kind of resolution. And finally, the conflict is over by the end of the story. So this line is the conflict. Each of these segments of the line has a different name, and we're going to ask you to learn those next. So I'm going to ask you to get your highlighters together and to look at the chart on the left-hand page of your notebook. This is the one that has the learning target that you've highlighted earlier. Readers think about how a plot unfolds in a series of episodes. You're going to take your highlighters or your pencils and you're going to color the chart along with me as we read about the different sections. I want to just remember that the conflict is here in the middle and that the conflict is what this line, this main triangle represents. So let's start with the color yellow, and we're going to highlight the flat part of the line. This is the very beginning of the story. It's called the exposition. Sometimes people call it the introduction. And it's where we learn basic information about the story. Where does the story take place? Who's the main character? And maybe what's happened before this story started that's going to create a situation with a problem for the character. But no action in the story has really happened yet. Then something happens. Right here, where the line turns, is the inciting action. Inciting means something that gets something else started. So whatever event in the story this is, it's the event that starts the conflict in this story. It gets things going. It's a very short part of the story. After that, the conflict starts to get more and more complicated. It escalates. It rises. We call this the rising action. In the rising action, there's a series of events related to the conflict that create more and more tension and make the conflict more complicated. On this story map, we often put 3 places for events, but there can be dozens of events in a novel, chapter after chapter. Most of your story, in terms of its length, is going to be in the rising action. Finally, there's a turning point. And we define the turning point as the climax of the story. The climax is the place where the conflict goes from getting worse and worse to the point where it's heading towards a resolution. So we say, what makes the conflict start to resolve? Oftentimes this is the main character realizing something or taking some new action that's going to help them make things better. After that, things start to fall into place. We call this the falling action. And on your copy of the chart, it may have been copied with an error. It may not say this language, but you should correct it if it's not correct. The falling action is where the events lead to the resolution of the conflict. If you need to pause the video here and write in those words, you should do it. There are usually one or two, just a couple of events in the falling action. This can be a very short part of the story, even just a few paragraphs or a few pages in a novel. And finally, the conflict is fully resolved and the character goes back to kind of a flat line in terms of conflict. The resolution is the part where the problem is resolved or it's over. The problem isn't always solved, but at least for now, there's kind of a resting point. Sometimes the character just accepts a new situation, but it's not the same level of problem that there used to be. So we say the problem is resolved. Your notebook chart on the left should look like this. We're asking you to know, to really learn the 6 parts of the structure: the exposition, the inciting action, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution.